All right, guys, welcome back to the Dr. Medic channel. Today, this is part 2 of the University of Cincinnati Air Care and Mobile Care. And today, this part, we're actually going to focus on this awesome mobile stroke unit that we see behind us. And so we're going to do a quick review of it and check out all the cool stuff that it has, both inside and outside. And we'll talk about the service and a little bit about what makes this service and this critical care service so much different than a lot of the other ones that are around the country. So stick around. Check it out. All that and more coming up on this episode of the Dr. Medic. So it's definitely a hot day here in Cincinnati. It feels like I'm back home in Oklahoma. I'm sweating so much, but nonetheless, we're going to check out this mobile stroke unit. Absolutely amazing resource that the citizens of Cincinnati have. I'm going to do a quick walk around, show you a bunch of cool things that the truck has inside and out, show you what makes it special compared to other critical care or even helicopter transport services that exist around the world. So let's get after it. Okay, so the first thing, this is a Freightliner, which means this is a commercial cab ambulance, which I'll talk more about in just a minute. Look at these giant horns that are right here. These things will definitely, hopefully, get the traffic out of the way, but we all know no matter where you are, sometimes people don't hear the sirens, but these, I don't think these air horns could possibly get any louder. Moving down here is going to be their diesel tank, but this is also an ultra low emissions vehicle, so it does have diesel exhaust fluid as well that they've got to fill up. Moving over here, this is going to be a D-tank, just like on any ambulance, and we'll talk more about the valves when we go inside, but it is pretty cool that they have both an electronic valve that opens and closes it, as well as an electronic gauge and digital gauge that you can see inside. They've got some hazmat cleanup materials that are down here and some general hardware in case they've got to fix something on scene. This is obviously kind of the brains of the ambulance and the wiring system. If you have OCD, this is definitely a dream to be able to look at this and see how organized all of this is. They have their Wi-Fi in here, and they actually communicate mostly through cellular technology. And for redundancy, because their communications are so important, they actually utilize 2 different cellular providers just in case they find themselves in some kind of dead spot or something like that. These are going to be the main batteries for the ambulance, and then over here is going to be a full schematic for all of the fuses and wiring systems and relays that might be on the vehicle. Okay, so back here is going to be some of their network stuff. They've got some traffic cones that they might need to set up and an ABC fire extinguisher. Anybody who uses diesel exhaust fluid in their emergency vehicles should always have a spare set or spare couple gallons of diesel exhaust fluid, because if that diesel exhaust fluid runs out, this ambulance could certainly go into limp mode and wouldn't be able to drive. So the fact that they carry that is very, very smart. Cool little compartment right here. This is where they have their power inverter, which converts their power from 120 volt to 12 volt and back and forth. So down here on the bottom left, even though this is a mobile stroke unit, it officially is still a mobile intensive care ambulance on the streets of Ohio. And so they have to have all the same ALS gear, advanced life support gear, that any other ambulance has. So they have their regular stat pack up here that has all their meds and airway equipment in it. They have a trauma bag and they have a pediatric bag, and then this is going to be their mobile suction unit. One of the best parts of this ambulance is the fact that it has this giant air conditioning unit on the back, which is so important to the function of the CT machine. But the back patient compartment is always climate controlled, even when the ambulance is parked. And these ports here are to keep the air conditioning going and keep everything charged up when the engine's not running. And they can actually access their stat pack from inside, which is pretty cool. And then this is the handle for their stretcher, and then we have their up and down buttons, because this stretcher is powered by both electrics and hydraulics. And yes, this is actually a D-tank. Secret combo in case you locked your keys in the ambulance. Again, like I said, even though that this vehicle is just doing mobile stroke unit most of the time, they still have a pediamate here for if they're going to transport kids. They have frat packs and splint packs, as well as a long spine board that hopefully is used just for moving a patient and not actually immobilizing them. So we are up in Cincinnati, Ohio, so it does snow up here, and they do get some crazy weather, so they've got a snow shovel as well as some ice scraping stuff. And check out this stair chair. That's a state mandated thing in case they've got to bring somebody down some stairs. It looks absolutely brand new. It's 350-pound capacity. Now, lots of ambulances do have these where it's got the fold-out step, which is always pretty cool. But this one's also got this cool fold-up table, which is kind of like a little incident command table. But this is where the nurse, while the CT tech is taking the CT, would be doing the charting and accessing the epic and kind of running the call from this spot. So that's about it for the outside of the ambulance. So before we jump inside, I mean, just take a look at downtown Cincinnati. Look how absolutely beautiful this is. This is the Ohio River right here with the Roebling Bridge going over, which this bridge is 150 years old, man. And it's basically kind of a beginning template for the Brooklyn Bridge. It's kind of designed the same way, but a little bit smaller. And like I said, this is the Ohio River, and we're looking over at Kentucky now, and they have these big barges shipping all kinds of stuff up and down the Ohio River all day, every day. It's an absolute sight to behold. Very, very beautiful. And this area down here is actually called the Banks, right? Because it's on the banks of the Ohio River. And it's home to the Cincinnati Reds there. Their stadium there is on the right. And just over to the left, you can't see it, but the Cincinnati Bengals stadium is there. There's lots of things to do, lots of families out, people walking, exercising, plenty of things to eat. Definitely got to check it out when you're there. UC Health is obviously a part of the University of Cincinnati, which is right basically across the street from the actual healthcare center. Beautiful campus, lots of cool stadiums, very big on their sports teams as well. Very, very beautiful campus. You should definitely check it out if you get a chance. And then finally, we can't forget that this mobile stroke unit is actually housed at a Springfield Township fire station, which is about 25 minutes northwest of downtown Cincinnati. And you got to remember, this is a full fire department all on their own. They have their own engines, they have their own paramedic ambulances that responds to 911 calls, and the mobile stroke unit is there to assist them and just respond to stroke calls. Okay, so climbing up inside this ambulance, I mean, this is a commercial cab ambulance. It's not a Type 1 or a Type 2 or a Type 3 that's made out of a van or a pickup truck that's then converted into an ambulance. This is actually a commercial cab vehicle that's made by Freightliner, and then they designed the ambulance around it. It's actually a lot more rugged that way, stronger, more beefy, and, you know, like me. All right, so as we're sitting up here in the front of this commercial cab, it's not too dissimilar from any other commercial cab, but one of the amazing things about it is that it's different from a normal Type 1, Type 2, or Type 3 ambulance, right? The normal ambulances that you see out there would be either vans or pickup trucks that have had the back of the vehicle chopped off and then they put a box there. Or if it's a Type 2 ambulance, it's actually a van that the entire back of the van, like a Transit or the old Econolines or something like that, have been converted to an actual patient compartment in the back. But this is what we call a commercial cab, that some people might call them a Type 3A or a Type 4, but really it's just a commercial cab ambulance where it could be a Freightliner or an E1 or something like that, where it's a big commercial truck where then they build a patient compartment on the back. So this is almost similar to you know, something that might be close to like an 18-wheeler feeling up front. It's got a lot of the same amenities. It's got this cool pneumatic seat to it, which is one of the coolest parts about one of these vehicles. It's got the big old steering wheel, which is amazing. Up front here, we have cruise control and headlight switches. We've got normal turn signals and wiper fluids, and you can control the mirrors over here. You have the same type of gauges that are up here, but you do have you know, a transmission temperature gauge and a DEF level gauge, which that does use diesel exhaust fluid. It's a big Cummins turbo diesel engine, and it does have a separate DEF tank. It's got a normal gear shifter here. These buttons over here roll down all 4 windows and roll them up. Isn't that cool? It rolls them up too. It's got mirror heat. You can lock the doors. You can even clean out the exhaust, which is a Cummins thing. We have some extra outlets over here for 12-volt power. The big yellow switch here is obviously the parking brake, because it says parking brake on it. You pull it to apply, you push to release, and that's a big pneumatic parking brake, which works pretty well. Then down below that a little bit, you see it's got a normal air conditioner. The air conditioner system on this is absolutely amazing. But in between that, you're going to see this leveling system that's both an RV type leveling system through jacks, but also a suspension system. So there's 2 ways that they can do that. Now the CT machine that's in the back, it's very important that the truck be 100% level when they're actually scanning a patient, and I mean like 100% level. They can normally do that just by parking the ambulance on a flat surface, but if they're in a driveway or they're in, you know, somewhere that is not level, they're going to have to either adjust it with a suspension system, which does have a little bit of leeway in it that they can do some work there, or they will have to actually come down here to this computerized leveling system that you see that actually lowers the jacks and will self-level the vehicle. And you can see on the pitch and roll with these gauges exactly how what the actual measurements are for pitch and roll. Now they can only go so far, so this thing can't like actually like, you know, try to tip the truck over or something like that. So if the roll is over 4.5 degrees, or if the pitch is above 3 degrees, they would actually have to reposition the ambulance. Moving down here, you have a fire comm system, which is amazing, which goes to these awesome headsets that you see here, which is very, very important. And anybody who doesn't use these headsets on ambulances, I highly encourage you to. It's an NFPA requirement, I think, for fire trucks, but it should be for ambulances as well, because the hearing protection is very, very important. And people don't pay attention to that enough on actual ambulances, because the noise it adds up chronically over a career, and so I definitely recommend you use those. But that's what the FireComm system is. Moving down below is the Motorola actual vehicle mounted radio unit. This is their main radio unit that connects to dispatch, hospitals, other fire departments, other EMS units. And that's kind of like their main lifeline. Over here to the side, you see they have the same type of radios, but these are handheld mobile units that they would take into the scene. These switches below are the cool switches, right? You hit the primary or secondary switch, and that is going to turn on the main emergency lights that you see as they go down the street. These side scene lights will light up the side of the ambulance really bright, especially if it's nighttime. That plays a huge role. We can turn the interior lights on, and it actually has a rear load dump. And so, like I said, this has a liquid suspension system to it, and so the ambulance is too tall to lift the stretcher up. And so normally the doors, when you open up the doors in the back, the ambulance will automatically lower so that you can get the stretcher in. But if for some reason the EMT or somebody up front needed to dump that on their own, they could just hit this button and it would lower the suspension in the back. Moving down below, we have our Welland siren system, which of course, you know, if you're on an ambulance, what's cooler than chirping the siren at your partner outside? This is going to be your siren system and your PA system, so it'll have multiple different sounds to the siren, as well as an air horn, but also a separate handheld unit, separate from the radio. That's a PA system that actually goes on a speaker, so maybe you can tell a bystander to move or yell at your partner or something like that. And then moving up here, they have a really cool camera system that shows you the backup camera, because there's obviously no rear view mirror, because if you turn around and look in the back, you just see the back of the a box, or the front of the box sitting in the back of the ambulance. So if you're going to back up or need to see what's going on behind the ambulance, you would just look at this camera. But it also has a patient compartment compartment camera, which is really, really cool. But even cooler than that, it's actually got turn signal cameras like on a lot of cars. So when you flip the switch, turn right, it shows you the right side of the ambulance, you know, your blind spot. If you switch it left, it shows you the blind spot on the left of the ambulance. Absolutely awesome. Okay, and jumping up here into the back of the ambulance, most ambulances don't have a back row, so this is pretty cool that you actually get to sit back here. But remember, this ambulance runs a crew of 4. There's an EMT who does most of the driving. There's a CT tech who operates the CT machine in the back. There's a nurse who is a critical care nurse who's required to be here for some of the extra scope of practice and medicines that they give. And there's also a paramedic. And so when they're going to a call, the EMT drives and the paramedic sits up front in the front right. And the paramedic would do all of the mapping and routing and radio control while the EMT is operating the lights and sirens and driving the actual ambulance. In the back here would be the CT tech and the nurse, and there's a computer for both of them back here that's actually tied into the hospital Epic patient charting system, which is pretty rare to see something like that pre-hospitally where they're actually connected into the charting system, because the IT and the security that goes along with that is so intense to ensure patient privacy. But they were able to get the technology to work. And they actually do all of the charting and register their patients. If they're utilizing this ambulance, they register the patient on scene, which is another one of the things that really saves time. Interesting to note that they are a mobile intensive care unit by Ohio standards. So they actually are considered a critical care advanced life support ambulance as well. So they're kind of doing 2 charts. The paramedic is doing the normal 911 EMS report like most paramedics would do, but then the nurse is also doing an actual chart on the patient as a nurse normally would, just as if the patient was on the floor. And then the CT tech actually has some paperwork to do too, because the CT tech, it works for the radiology department, and they have their own set of paperwork that they have to do. Back here, they also have their own headsets. They have seat belts. Obviously, they can spread out because there's room for 3 back here, but there's only two people who normally sit back here, so there's plenty of room. They've got their gloves down here. They've got their own vest. They've got extra paperwork. They've got everything they need to get ready and get prepared to show up to one of these calls. Okay, so now moving into the patient compartment, there is an ungodly amount of room back here, which is absolutely amazing. Okay, moving up here to the top, this is where they're going to have all of their regular, ambulance stuff. They've got their BVMs, suction units, different nasal cannulas and non-rebreather masks. There's plenty of tubing in here and all of their isotonic fluids in here. It is so cool that this ambulance, they can actually carry hypertonic fluids to be able to control blood pressure in some of the patients that they run on. But we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Up here they have their vent tubing for either a Hamilton vent and an impact vent that they carry. Moving along, every spot on this ambulance also has a headset, even in the back. Okay, moving over here, this spot would normally be where like the captain's chair is on a regular ambulance, and maybe you'd have room to do some paperwork right here down on this little counter or something like that. But you obviously can't do that because there's a giant CT machine sitting behind you, which is the primary mission of this ambulance, which is to reduce overall scene times and bring the resources of the hospital out to the patient. And so by getting this CT machine out to the patient and ruling out whether or not they have a blood clot or not, allows the critical care nurse that's on board to actually give TNK, which is a modern form of TPA or something like that. It's basically a clot busting drug, to be able to give that on scene and reduce that door to needle time down to that. I think they told me recently they ran a call that was only 16 minutes. So from the time they got on scene to the time that they gave TNK, which is clot busting drugs, was only 16 minutes, and the patient's symptoms resolved and were improved by the time that they actually got to the hospital. All right, so let's take a look at how they actually acquire the CT. Say hello to Fred the head. That's what they use to practice. And you can see how the head sticks out. Fred's head there sticks out a little bit over the stretcher. So it's got to kind of have a counterweight. That's why that bag is there. And like I said, the stretcher has to be raised up so it fits. And the hole is a little bit smaller than the average CT. But that does create some limitations sometimes, but it works for most of their patients. So then they actually move the CT out on motorized wheels and fit the patient's head right into the CT machine. And then the CT tech then sets up her computer over here and logs into the patient's chart via Epic. We're actually going to log into Fred the head's chart, of course, not into somebody else's. And then there's going to be a countdown. Now there's two modes that this thing can do. It can do a 30-second scan where it kind of is just one quick continuous scan, or it can do a 2-minute scan where it does one picture, then moves a little bit more superior, takes another scan and moves more superior and goes up and down like that. It's probably a little bit more accurate that way. But either way, it can do a 30-second scan or a 2-minute scan. And you can watch it here acquiring the images of Fred's head. And you can read what it says right there, that it does, obviously this is a full X-ray CT machine, so there is radiation. She would have to wear her lead vest. And there are lead shields that go around the patient's head. And then she also has to wear a dosimeter, which I think she has to turn in maybe every couple months or something like that. And they would actually check to see if she's been exposed to too much radiation. But nonetheless, here's kind of the results of what Fred's head looks like. He looks pretty good. And each one of these images is kind of just starting from inferior and going superior, going from the bottom of his head to the top of his head. And Fred checks out and looks like he's good and doesn't have a bleed. So moving over to this side right here, what we have here is we have a little pass-through door right here, which actually goes through to their giant oxygen tank, which sends oxygen throughout all of the different oxygen connectors inside the back of the ambulance. We've got some regular 120 volt receptacles right here that you can plug anything into. This is some 12 volt adapters, and I suppose you can put your cigarette lighter in there if you needed to have a smoke. These are going to be several oxygen connectors to connect the tubing to for your low pressure lines for things like a BVM, nasal cannula, non-rebreather mask, whatever. This is the internal temperature, very important. Remember I told you the temperature of this ambulance has to stay below 80 or 85 degrees. The truck has to always be running or be plugged in because this CT scanner cannot operate above, I think, about 85 degrees, which is super important to have this thing always in a ready state, and so if it gets too hot, then they need to cool the thing down, which would defeat the whole purpose of trying to do these things quickly. Over here you have some extra switches for things like interior lights, dimmer switches. You have a heater that you can turn on back here. It actually has an electronic O2 main valve, even though there is a manual valve back here as well on the D tank. There's actually an electronic control valve as well. There's some extra USB charging ports here and even a ventilation fan. It's also got this really neat digital oxygen pressure readout so that you don't actually have to go through this tunnel again and actually see what the manual gauge is. It's electronic right here. Just like up front, they have a similar radio system. I don't know if they have two radios or not, or if there's just one radio with one head up front and one head back here. Some ambulances, you actually have to transfer control from the front to the back. But either way, it does the same thing where they can talk to the hospitals, other ambulances, and fire departments and stuff like that. This is going to be their main suction unit. They do have a portable suction unit that's on the outside that I already showed you. And so that suction unit is controlled with this suction button and then this gauge that you see right here. They have multiple IV pumps. Looks like these are single channel pumps, and they would use these pumps for anything that requires certain infusion rates or something like that. Now, moving along to like these types of seatbelts. These types of seatbelts are absolutely paramount. In EMS, the most unsafe thing that any paramedic or EMT or even a nurse who might be in the back, one of the most unsafe things besides, walking around on the highway on a vehicle accident scene is being in the back of this ambulance while it's moving. And so they always got to be seat belted in. And if an ambulance doesn't meet certain standards by either NFPA or Triple-K, then they're actually not required to have these types of seat belts. And it makes it really kind of unsafe to be in the back unless you're buckled up and you're not able to provide as good a patient care all the time. What these things allow you to do is harness over your shoulders, and you can still lean way forward to be able to take care of the patient and still be strapped into the ambulance, because you don't even have to get into a crash. It's just your partner up front could swerve to avoid a deer, or they could slam on the brakes, and going from 70 to 20, anything that's in this ambulance is going to go flying forward, and that includes you. So if you have these seat belts, you should use them. If you don't have these seat belts, you should probably try to pressure your management a little bit to invest it in the latest standards to have the highest safety equipment. Okay, moving over to this back wall, this is where you're going to see where they keep their impact vent. They don't transport a whole lot of patients on the vent here because they're worried about stroke, but they do have some amazing stuff that's in this cabinet right here, which is very unique to this ambulance. Okay, so this is one of the coolest cabinets that's actually in this ambulance. Now, even though this ambulance is designed to bring the CT machine, the resources of the hospital out to the patient, the whole purpose of that is so that they can determine whether or not the patient has a hemorrhagic stroke, because if they don't have a hemorrhagic stroke, meaning they don't see bleeding into the brain, but the patient is having stroke-like symptoms, then they are going to assume that the patient is having some type of clot. In other words, what we call an ischemic stroke. And if they do have an ischemic stroke, the frontline treatment for that is to give some form of clot-busting drug like TPA or something. And in this case, they give TNK, which is tenecteplase. And so the critical care nurse that's on this ambulance can actually put in the information to the physician at the hospital, and then get orders through their Epic charting system and administer that TNK here on scene. And you would only want to give that drug if there's no bleed, because if you gave it while they had a bleed, you'd obviously make the bleed a lot worse. But the treatment doesn't stop there, because if they actually do have a bleed, they have reversal agents, assuming the patient is on a blood thinner like warfarin or something like that, where they can give something like vitamin K or K-Centra to actually reverse their blood thinning agents that the patient is normally taking to prevent a stroke. That can actually help slow down the bleed that they actually have. And they can administer that right here on this ambulance, and those medicines are kept up here. They actually can also control the blood pressure with things like hydralazine and hypertonic fluids. Giving hypertonic fluids is a very high critical thinking level medication to be giving, and this critical care team is able to give that out in the field before the patient actually gets to the ER. Okay, right up here in this safe right here, every ambulance is going to have a safe. It's DEA requirements that you have controlled substances that things like Versed or morphine or opiates or whatever controlled substance it is that you're worried about. Typically has to be dual lock. They probably have a triple lock system here, but nonetheless, this is their safe system. But this is also where they keep their TNK, otherwise known as tenecteplase. And now down below here is actually their refrigerator system, which is where they're going to keep their paralytics. At least their succinylcholine, it normally has to be refrigerated. But the coolest part about this refrigerator down here is they're actually involved in a double-blind randomized control trial for factor 7. Which is basically if a patient meets the criteria and they do have a hemorrhagic stroke or hemorrhagic bleed, where they are not taking blood thinners or something like that, where they would use actual reversal agents. If they meet all the criteria, they can actually administer this factor 7 out in the field, which is showing some promising results. But this is an international randomized control trial, and if the patient meets the criteria, they're doing that research right out here in the field. And which is groundbreaking and absolutely the highest technology of pre-hospital medicine that you could possibly get. And then moving up here to the top, they have some hazmat equipment here and their bio bags that they might use, extra gloves. And then moving up to this cabinet right here, which is the last one on the inside of this ambulance, is where they actually have the injection guy, because using the injector that the CT tech would use, if they did need to do a contrast CT scan where they had to actually inject dye, they can also do that right here in this ambulance using this injection dye. Just another example of bringing the resources of the hospital out to the actual patient. And last but not least is going to be this stretcher system. Now, at its core, it's really the same stretcher that's in a lot of ambulances. It's this 700-pound Stryker power stretcher that can be power lifted up and down, but it doesn't have the actual power load system. It saves everybody's backs in the EMS across the country. And the reason is because the stretcher has to actually be lifted up into this configuration to about this height to be able to move the patient's head beyond the end of the stretcher to get them into the actual CT machine. Other than that, it's a pretty normal stretcher, but it does have this cool little mount here for the cardiac monitor. And then above it, you see this iPad right here with this really cool mounting system. This is the telehealth. So the physicians are actually able to connect to this iPad, which would be right above the patient, and they can double check assessments. They can talk to the patient. They can gain the consent that is needed because things like TPA or TNK or clot busting drugs, they have a pretty long list of things that they have to rule out, good history taking, and they've got to be able to get inform the patient and get the consent from the patient or from a family member or a power of attorney. And it really helps that they have this here so they can communicate directly with the patient or directly with a family member who might be sitting in the back of the ambulance. Their monitor is this Zoll X Series monitor, but they've paid for the very expensive options on this, like having a transducer and ART-line capabilities. And yes, the nurse in the back here, they have ART-line kits and can actually gain access to be able to hook up that transducer and to get real-time arterial waveform blood pressure monitoring, which, as we all know in critical care, is really the only way to accurately measure somebody's MAP or arterial blood pressure. And what's actually amazing is they're also able to do point-of-care INR testing, which is one of the tests that's needed to see whether or not somebody is a candidate for blood thinner reversal, like vitamin K or something like that. But they're also able to do a point-of-care VBG with their EPIC system, and that's EPOC, not like the EPIC charting, but it's very similar to like an iStat, but this is just what they use here to kind of like a competitor to iStat, and they can check a patient's H&H or almost their full CBC and get things like venous blood gases, which is very important when you're out here in the field to have that information. All right, guys, so that's my review of University of Cincinnati Air Care and Mobile Care, specifically this mobile stroke unit. Again, I hope that you watched part one, which was actually with the helicopter out in Mount Orab. This is an absolutely amazing resource. It's a very expensive resource that the citizens of Cincinnati and the greater surrounding area should be so grateful to have because it doesn't exist in most parts of the country. It's making changes, it's improving patient outcomes, and you know what I love that it's doing is it's raising the standard of what pre-hospital medicine is. They have an EMT, a paramedic, a nurse, and in this case, most times that nurse is also a nurse paramedic and a CT tech on this ambulance pre-hospitally. Absolutely amazing. Hey, if you've got an ambulance or a helicopter or a cool fire truck or something like that you want me to check out, leave me a message below or send me an email. Otherwise, you all be safe, be nice to one another, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you on the next episode.